But my goodness, if we can help you out with something, I would love to do that. So I love this program. I mean, it's I have to take care of ourselves. So,
All right, welcome to the Lunch and Learn today. Talking about cooking for one or two. This is something we've wanted to offer for quite some time, but with COVID and not being able to meet in person, something we've kind of held off on Lunch and Learns as we typically have them, and or just showing pre-recorded YouTube videos. But now that we can get back in person, we can get back to this topic. So how many of you guys in the class right now are either empty nesters or maybe living by yourself or just cooking for one or two in general? So a good amount of us. So today we're going to again talk about cooking for one or two, offer you some tips and tricks for making it convenient, making it affordable, some shopping tips, and then we'll also look at a good website that has some awesome recipes on it to give you some inspiration for helping you better cook for one or two people at a time and not have a lot of food waste and that kind of stuff. So the basic premise for this outline is from the Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. So I'm gonna make sure we recognize the information that we're getting today and where it's from. So we're gonna, like I said, we're gonna talk about some easy cooking strategies and how to be well stocked. So whether that's in the pantry or how to be prepared when you're going shopping, how to plan ahead, and then also some food safety and prep stuff, because I'd be remiss as a public health professional not to make sure you know how to prepare your food safely. So we'll jump into the food safety part of it first as we start our presentation. So first off, always start with a clean surface. Clean utensils, wash your hands, soap and water, make sure your prep space is also clean. Use either soap and water or other disinfectant that's appropriate for the kitchen. Always wash your fresh fruits and vegetables unless they're labeled pre-wash. So this is important. Definitely don't need to re-wash, say, packaged lettuce or packaged spinach or kale. In fact, most studies show if you rewash those products, they become more contaminated than if you would just use them straight out of the bag if they're already labeled pre-washed. But if you're buying apples or even going to slice through, say, a watermelon or something, it's good just to wash that off first and then cut through it. Obviously, you think, well, I don't even eat the rind of a watermelon, but when you slice that knife through that peel and rind, it will carry through the rest of the fruit. So just a good idea to keep everything clean. Always, again, for food safety, keep cold foods cold and hot food for hots as much as possible throughout the process, and avoid cross-contamination. So this is really important when you're cooking with, say, raw foods like meat. You don't want to cut your raw chicken up first and then, chop your broccoli on that same board later. That chicken will cross-contaminate into that broccoli. So usually save the meat and the raw foods for last, or use a different prep area for cutting those items. Another big thing is don't try to refreeze items too often. That can be a chance for bacteria to grow. And a big safety thing is don't set hot dishes, especially glassware, on cold or wet surfaces, because a lot of times you will not have that dish anymore. It will crack or worse. So just be mindful of where you're putting things as well. So a couple knife safety things also before we get started. One, how you hold a knife when you're prepping can be very important. Hold it near the base of the blade, where the blade is actually starting, not at the tip of the knife, or excuse me, at the very bottom of the knife. You want a nice firm grip, similar to like a hammer grip. You don't hold that at the very end. You don't have very much control over it. So, and then if you'll look at the picture on the right, you can see how they're holding their hand to chop food items. This is awesome trick 2 to use. You'll roll your fingertips under so that just the flat parts of your knuckles are parallel to the knife. when you're chopping, and you just kind of scoot your hand backwards as you chop over that tomato or apple or what have you. When you're dicing or chopping foods, this prevents from getting your fingers in there, the fingertips. You can just keep that blade of the knife resting up against the flat side of those knuckles to help guide you across, and much less chance for nicking yourself. So try that next time you're chopping something up if you haven't already, and it's pretty slick and you can go pretty fast. A couple other food prep skills when it comes to measuring. You want to make sure you're measuring accurately. This is probably more important if you're someone who's a baker versus if you're cooking something, because baking, those recipes typically need to be a little bit more on point with what you're using. So when it comes to powders, things like flours or sugars, the best way actually is to spoon that item into your measuring cup and then, level it off the back of a knife or something. I am definitely not someone who takes the time to spoon the flour in. I kind of put the scoop in the bag, shake it a little bit so it settles, and call it good. But it's actually found that when you do that, you could add up to 30% more of the ingredient into the recipe than it calls for, and that can totally throw off the result of what you're making. So the best way to go about measuring flour, sugar, that kind of stuff is to spoon that powder into the cup, level it off, and then dump it into your mixing bowl. Now, if it calls for like packed sugar, obviously that's a little bit different, because you will pack that brown sugar into your cup or whatnot as it calls for. Liquids, there's liquid measuring cups. Those are typically clear, so you can see through them. The best thing here is, again, gauge this at eye level with the cup resting on the countertop. Don't try to gauge it with your eye, holding it up high, pretty unsteady and often inaccurate. Smaller amounts, you want to use measuring spoons. So if you don't have any of those at home and you're someone who needs to meal prep, those would be a good investment. And if you're really trying to be accurate, obviously the food scale is the best way to go. We don't weigh our food very often, but some people do who maybe are on a diet, really need to be exact. Or things like meats and pastas, it's hard to measure in a cup or a measuring cup or something. So a food scale can be helpful if they're calling for 12 ounces of meat or 16 ounces of pasta or something like that, and you're not sure what that actually looks like. Also, it's helpful when it comes to prepping foods that you know a little bit about the food lingo, so that when you're reading that recipe, things don't sound foreign to you. So these are some common terms you might see in a recipe, and knowing what they mean can help you prepare that ingredient appropriately. So here's the definitions of a lot of those. One on here that I think is funny is, and it just reminds me of a show on TV, but folding. A lot of people don't know what folding means. So that just basically taking your spatula, running it down the side to the bottom of the bowl, folding it or bringing it upwards to the top again without whipping or stirring it vigorously, basically. So you're trying to preserve the air that is in that product that you're mixing. So that would be called folding. I know it's not on this chart, but that's another one that a lot of people are unfamiliar with. But slice, chop, dice, mince, what does a seasoning or a pinch or a dash mean? There's some rough estimates up there listed. Braising or charring, what's the difference between a boil and a simmer? So things maybe that will be helpful to know if you're someone who's new in the kitchen before you get started with cooking for yourself. So the next area is to be well stocked, because that can play a big part into if you're going to cook or not. If you don't have the ingredients on hand, it seems to be more of a chore, and you may find yourself just running through the Wendy's drive-through rather than actually preparing a healthy meal if it's just yourself. So making sure you have a well-stocked kitchen can be super helpful to yourself. So what does a well-stocked pantry look like? This example here is of a healthy pantry. So obviously my pantry does not look like this. I wish it did. But these are some things to think about considering having on hand. Some sort of baking flour. Most of us would probably consider all-purpose white flour, but there's almond flour, coconut flour, lots of gluten-free flours these days if that's something to your liking, or you have an allergy or you're trying to be a little bit healthier and stay away from the white processed flours. Some sort of starch or thickening agent. Baking powder and baking soda are also called in a lot, especially if you're a baker. Maybe chocolate chips have those on hand. If you're trying to be healthy, dark chocolate be the better way to go. Some sort of sweetener is also helpful. Stevia is pretty popular these days, but syrup and honey can also be used in its place, especially if you're more of a cooker and not a baker, and you just need, a bit of something sweet added to a recipe. Syrup and honey can take the place of sugar. If you're a baker, a lot of times you need to use sugar for the volume. And so then syrup and honey obviously would not be a good substitute for stevia. Then some sort of nuts and seed varieties would be helpful. Almonds, cashews, maybe peanuts or sunflower seeds. Obviously, there's a whole list that's not listed here, but things to consider adding to have on hand. Different cups, a couple different kinds of rice, wild, maybe jasmine rice. Then a handful of seasonings. So some of the more popular ones you'll see in recipes are obviously salt and pepper. Maybe garlic powder and onion powder would be good. Either cumin or chili powder. They kind of have similar tastes. Paprika, maybe lemon pepper, or other some type of meat pepper seasoning that you like. Do you have a favorite Mrs. Dash or Grill Mate seasoning that you like? Those are helpful to have on hand. Then we get into the canned goods. So maybe beans and peas and corn. Diced tomatoes are called for quite a bit in recipes, especially for dinners and lunches and such like that. Beans, either canned beans or dry beans even. So maybe some kidney beans, black beans, garbanzo or chickpeas. Tomato sauce is called for quite often. Having a couple of cans of tomato paste is also helpful. And a lot of times you don't need a lot of tomato paste in recipes, but it can freeze easy. A lot of people will freeze it in, say, an ice cube dish or something. And so they've got like a tablespoon in every ice cube in their ice cube tray, and then they can just take that out of the freezer when they need it for a various recipe. And then also coconut milk. This is, again, not in everyone's pantry, but if you're someone who's not a big milk drinker, but you like to have milk on hand, this is a shelf-stable option, that you could use from time to time. And also maybe you need a heavy fat substitute. Obviously, coconut milk has a good deal of fat in it too that can help in certain recipes. Or if you're someone who's big into smoothies or things like that, and again, you don't have refrigeration or you don't like to have regular milk on hand, coconut milk can serve in that place. Having some oils and fats also is helpful. You'll use these a lot when you're cooking. So maybe you have coconut oil or ghee, which is sort of like clarified butter. Maybe you've got avocado oil or olive oil or a vegetable oil of sorts, or nut butters like peanut butter, cashew butter, almond butter. Having a couple of those on hand can be helpful. And then the condiments to your liking. So are you someone who's a ketchup eater? Maybe you're a barbecue sauce guy. Make sure you have some sort of salad dressing on hand. That can be helpful. So obviously it's not an all-inclusive list. Some of these things you may have in your pantry, some of them you're like, I'll never use that. And that's fine. This is just kind of a starting point to kind of gauge, as these topics typically you'll find in some of our staple recipes. So another big thing is, in order for us to cook smart for one or two people, we have to be smart shoppers. So we're going to go through a couple tips here on how to be supermarket savvy. So one, I'd always say, first of all, make sure you're browsing the market ads. Typically in North Iowa, those come out on Tuesdays. So take a look, see what maybe is on sale and foods that you like that are available, and kind of plan your weekly meals off of those, or things that you need to stock up for to fill your cupboard staples. Create a meal plan for the week. That can be very helpful, so that you only have to shop maybe once a week, or maybe every 2 weeks, which would be even better. And that way you've got everything ready to go when it does come time during that week to prep your meal. That's probably the biggest barrier for cooking for one or two, is you don't have maybe a couple ingredients. And so that means going to the store. Wouldn't it just be easier for me to go to the drive-through instead? Then also prepare a shopping list before you go, so make sure you got everything. If you're trying to be healthy, shop the perimeter. That's where all the good stuff is. And then just go down aisles for specific items. Don't be a browser, because you could get tempted to buy things you don't need or are unhealthy for your plan. And then also, if you think things are a good deal, maybe they're on sale and you know they use them often, don't be afraid to buy multiples of them, so that you can save $1 down the line, or maybe not have to shop as often. Don't shop on an empty stomach, and look for long shelf life options as well, just to get the longevity of those things. And because you're just one person, you want that item to last for a while and you're not having to go all the time to shop. Then also consider using online ordering because it's convenient, but it can also reduce temptations for you to buy some of those maybe less healthy processed meals for one, instead of making your own. You know, don't have to live off of ramen every day or Hungry Jack meals. I don't know if any of you have used e-meals before, but that's a program with Walmart, but there are many others, other places. But essentially, you go online, they kind of pair a weekly meal plan with what their ad is. So some of the foods that are on sale, but then also you can specify the types of meals you like or the cuisines, you know, I like pastas and that kind of stuff. They'll kind of tailor it for you. But then they'll also create your online shopping cart, and you can go in there and say and take off things that maybe you already have on hand at home. But then you pick up your delivery time, they'll have it ready for you. And so you just go for contactless pickup and grab all the food, and then you've got enough ingredients and stuff to feed your family for the week. So it can be super convenient. It does cost a subscription with the Walmart one, I think, after so many free attempts, but something to consider if you're someone who hates grocery shopping, or maybe you just don't have the time, but you like to prep your meals and have something a little bit more homemade than something out of a box all the time or drive through. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of some cooking tips for someone who just wants to cook for 1 or 2 people. So first tip is prepare things that are semi-homemade. Don't have to be everything from scratch. So an example might be, maybe you've got some instant rice. You could add some canned chicken and some frozen veggies and a can of sauce. So some of it's homemade, but it still mimics, you know, something that's more healthy than a takeout food. Maybe you're going to make stir fry, so you want that to be, you know, maybe you've cut your meat, you've sauteed it or whatnot, and rather than prep all the veggies, you just pull out a frozen bag of vegetables, add that in, and then a bottle of stir fry sauce. Still, you know, can be pretty healthy, pretty homemade, but it's convenient and it's simple, and not everything's from scratch. So next step would be to choose simple recipes. I would encourage you to choose recipes that are maybe 5 ingredients or less if you're cooking for yourself or just 1 or 2 people. So you're not spending the entire time prepping something that's only going to take you 10 minutes to eat or something. So make it simple. Cut the recipe in half. This is easier for recipes that are more on the cooking side versus the baking side, because baking recipes like cakes and cookies and stuff are a little bit harder to cut in half, but things that you cook for meals are much easier to reduce in quantity. Then you also want to consider using canned or frozen foods when you can. Again, convenience. 2, you can also kind of portion out, especially frozen, how much of that you want. You don't have to use the entire amount. Freeze leftovers. That's a huge one. And the bigger caveat here is to freeze them in containers that can be reheated and washed in a dishwasher or something. That's going to make it much more easy for you to use that food the second time. So say you end up making a larger casserole or pan of lasagna, breaking that into 3 or 4 different dishes and putting them in the freezer to pull out some other night when you're short on time. It's going to be super slick, and it's already in a microwave safe dish. You can throw it right from the freezer to your microwave and get it hot, and then throw it in the dishwasher when you're done. Dollar Tree has these. I think Dollar Trees are black with like a clear lid. They're like 3 or 4 for $1. So they're super inexpensive, but can be reused quite often, and also a good idea for things to bring to lunch with your leftovers, or, you know, you froze something and want to bring it to lunch for later in the day. Another thing that's helpful is to shop once or maybe every 2 weeks rather than every day, because that can kind of get you in a rut to not want to cook very often if you always are having to drag yourself to the store for every little ingredient that you forgot every day. So again, that comes back to making your list, having a meal plan sort of penciled out in your brain so that you know what you need when you go the first time. And then kind of just make it a routine. Now, some people love to grocery shop and they want to go every day. And if that's you, that's fine. But most of us probably don't have the time or energy for that. This is just a quick reminder of what the My Healthy Plate looks like. Most of your meal you want to be composed of vegetables and protein. Some fruit is helpful, and maybe if you got time or room and space and hunger for some whole grains. healthy fats, and something to drink. So the big place I wanted to show you today is called onedishkitchen.com. And I'll try to throw you there today. And we'll visit it briefly if we got time here. But this is a gal, she created the website. She basically has single serve recipes for breakfast, lunch, dinner, dessert, snacks, beverages, pretty much anything you can think of. So here are some examples. She's got an apple dessert for one, a soup for one, a scone for one, a recipe, a meatloaf recipe for one. So if you're just in the mood for cooking for 1 or 2 people, she's pretty much done all the work and cut down all the ingredients to just prepare 1 or 2 servings of these meals, which can be helpful and you feel like you have less waste. So we'll visit this real quick. This is what the website looks like. So you can go to recipes and then she's broken it down into different categories. So if we would select, say, breakfast, you can see all these sorts of one dish breakfast recipes. So maybe you and your special loved one are in the mood for eggs Benedict. You could jump down to the recipe and here's the things we need. We need an English muffin, eggs, butter, Canadian bacon. Then here's directions for the hollandaise sauce. Now, if you're trying to do the semi-homemade, you could just buy some hollandaise sauce and pour it over your eggs and muffin. So totally up to you, but again, pretty cool that she's done all the hard work for you. Maybe you're someone who's, maybe you've got a chocolate craving and you need something for satisfying your chocolate. Here's a mini devil food cake or a 1 serving. I think earlier I was looking, there was like chocolate cake in a coffee mug. Here's one deep dish brownie, 1 serving. So if you're someone who gets carried away when the whole pan of brownies are made, you can use these recipes instead. So you only get 1 treat and it doesn't ruin your week by too much splurging. So check this site out. Again, it's called onedishkitchen.com and get some ideas and some inspiration there. I know some of you submitted some questions, so I'll run through those quick so that people online can know what we were talking about. But one of you said one of the biggest challenges is getting protein in enough meals, especially for yourself, because you're not someone who wants to thaw out an entire pound of hamburger or cook a full chicken or whatnot. So eggs are a great way to add protein if you can add some egg dishes to your meals. Protein powders these days, a lot of people are making smoothies or mixing powders into recipes, whether it's pancakes or they've even got unflavored protein powders these days, so you could really mix them into any sort of dish you wanted to boost up the protein. One of the gals I know mentioned they add collagen type whey flavoring or whatnot into their, or a mix, instead of flavoring, a mix into their foods to help add a little extra protein. So there's lots of new options these days. Another suggestion was this person doesn't use all of, say, their vegetables or canned goods. They'll put them in freezer bags or freezer containers or ice cube trays and freeze them for later use. And then they can just pop out the amount they need for the certain dishes that they're doing. So that's a great way to do it. If you do end up making a huge dish, like I mentioned earlier, portioning it out into smaller containers before you put it away for the evening is perfect, because then you can either freeze some, keep some in the fridge for during that week, and you can just easily pull it out 1 serving at a time for when you need it for maybe a work lunch or an evening supper. So definitely visit onedishkitchen.com, check it out. Lots of awesome recipes. And if you need to get to that, here's the QR code. You can scan that and it should take you to the onedishkitchen.com if I did it correctly. So that was brief. If you have questions or if you need a copy of this PowerPoint, you can email me at kgertis@cghealth.com and we can get you a copy. Otherwise, we're going to post this to YouTube, so you'll be able to watch it on the Stride YouTube channel. And again, I encourage you to visit that site. And there's many others, obviously, if you Google cooking for 1 or 2 to give you some ideas. But give it a shot. Don't be afraid. It can be very healthy and helpful to cook things from home rather than always have to rely on fast food or processed packaged food and stuff that's meant for just one or two. So if you have any questions, give us a call or shoot us an email and we'll be able to help you. So thanks everyone for listening. And with that, we'll stop the recording and upload it so that everyone